Welcome to the Broken Pie Chart Podcast, episode 167. I'm your host, Derek Moore. This week, we're going to do a way too early sort of preview of the midterms, and we'll talk about it in the vein of the markets. We'll look at some of the key races. Don't worry, we're not going to go through every single congressional district race, but with me, I think fourth time on the program, is Spencer Wright from Halbert Wealth Management. Spencer, how you doing today?
Hello, Derek. Doing great. Very nice to be here. Always love being on the show. Get to talk about some fun stuff. So I'm really looking forward to it today.
Excellent. I know you and I, I'll link to some prior episodes that you and I did, and we did a deep dive on, hey, does it matter who's in power for the markets? Some surprising stuff. I'll link to that. I'm not going to link to our pre-presidential election one because I think we both got that one slightly wrong, but we'll get to the presidential stuff too. But I want to start with a couple things. Number one is, I know you've been following this thing, so let's start. There's the House races, right? There's the Senate races, and then we're going to do a way too early thing on the president races based upon the 13 keys. But I want to first start with you, and the midterm elections are in November. And the midterms, we call them the midterms, right? Because that's in between a presidential election and the next presidential election, right? So start here. There's this thing called the congressional preference poll, or let's start there. What are you seeing there? And what does that say for the House going to Republican? By what margin? Democrat? Start there, Spencer.
Yeah, Derek, it's very interesting because the generic congressional vote, the generic ballot, the polls, historically, if your party is +2, +3, maybe even +4, the president's reasonably popular, you feel your party should feel pretty good going into the midterms. That usually indicates that you might win some close races. You're going to have probably a larger percentage of safe seats versus the other party. And so you feel pretty confident. And so what we're seeing, of course, is that the Republicans are enjoying a very nice spread, a very thick spread, if you will, on the generic ballot. And it depends, of course, on what you look at. And there are a number of polls. Two polls are bringing the Republican average down, and these polls have the Democrats at +1 and then +3. Those are maybe outliers because if you look at everything else, and these are not, party hack machine push polls. These are very respected polls by the likes of Quinnipiac, Harvard Harris, Emerson, well-known names. At any rate, the Republicans are enjoying a spread of, call it on average, around 5 to 6 points. So it's +5 or 6 GOP, depending, on net balance. That is very significant. A +6 reading on that, with coupled with a president that is, to be generous, having some popularity challenges. Nate Silver, who is a great statistician, one of the best, really, his 538 website. If you look at all polls, every last one, the average has Biden at about a 41.7% approve and a 52.3% disapprove. That combined with the generic ballot on an average of +6, I'm sorry to, I'm not trying to be a shill here, but that is devastating for the Empower Party. And it's so bad, frankly, it's hard to know how bad it really is, because we haven't seen readings, certainly on the generic ballot, like this before. So my guess would be, you hear a lot of shrill talk out there about how bad this is going to be. It's going to be bad, Derek. How bad? I'm not entirely sure, but I feel very confident saying, particularly even for the House, it's going to be very bad for the Democrats.
I think one of the things that is, and when we say generic ballot, we're not saying, "Hey, voters in Arizona, hey, voters in New York." It's really this generic thing. What's your preference
Right.
for Congress as a whole? I also would point out, and typically, Spencer, at the midterms, regardless of party in power, the parties, so whatever party is in power. So let me rephrase this. It doesn't matter if you have a Republican or a Democrat in office. It doesn't matter if the House is Republican or Democrat. In the first term of a president, typically in the midterm, that election sees the prevailing party lose seats, right? So if you knew nothing else, whether it was Democrat or Republican, you would say chances are they lose seats. How many is kind of what you're getting at, though, right?
Only one time, I think, in the last 70 or so years has that not happened.
What year was
So
that?
that was 2004, or maybe it was 2002, 2002 maybe.
2002, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, 2002, where Bush actually enlarged majorities, albeit not much, but a little bit. That doesn't happen very often. There were, of course, extenuating circumstances as to why that happened. So one could say maybe that was a one-off propelled by very specific circumstances. Um, I think that probably is the case.
That circumstance, by the way, of course, was 9/11 in
Yes.
September, and then you have the midterms, and his approval rating went up. I do think it's interesting too that the approval rating of a president when the president's party is in power, I think that does matter because right or wrong, the president gets blamed for a lot of things, and I think that rolls downhill. It's interesting you say. So I would agree. I think the House does go. It switches from Democrat to Republican. I guess what I'm unsure of yet is the margin. And
Well, I mean, Derek, consider this. I think you and I before have talked about the redistricting, the gerrymandering, the basic shenanigans that both parties employ in an effort to jockey, to help their position in the House of Representatives. And right now, uh, if all things were equal, if the Democrats could be +1, +2 in the generic ballot, and Biden could have a 50% popularity at this point. But because of the redistricting, because of these gerrymandering efforts by the GOP, it looks like that they're going to pick up kind of no matter what, sort of by default. They're going to pick up 17 to 19 seats. And that's enough all by itself for them to take control.
yeah, I think that's an interesting point, and I will say that you're right. Both parties do it, and if anyone doesn't know what we're talking about with the idea of gerrymandering, it got its name by an individual, but it's the idea that hey, a lot of state legislatures. So the way this works, either the state legislature or whatever party that's in power in the state draws it. Some states, like Arizona, have a quote unquote independent commission that draws the maps, and others have some other way of doing it. But basically, it's kind of like let's take a state like New York City or New York, and you would think if you looked at a congressional map, each congressional district, that's where the House of Representatives comes out, and there's over 400 total House members right now. You would think you'd say, okay, well, we'll have a one member in their district. If you looked on a map, you'd have all these little squares or circles, and they'd be in one place. But no, no, no. What they do is, you might have Niagara Falls with a piece of Staten Island, which is in New York City. Niagara Falls, for anyone who doesn't know, is on the Canadian border. I was going to joke around. You'd have a piece of Miami. Of course, that's a different state, but yeah, that does matter, and remember, politicians want to stay in power, and for a lesser extent, I think a lot of them want to, become wealthy in power. So it's good gig if you can get it, but they jerry rig or gerrymander the thing, so they almost decide, okay, we'll have so many seats for this party, so many seats for this party. But what you're saying is, um, that has been, when you look at all the gerrymandering that happened, it is plus Republican this time, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's leaning pretty heavily Republican, and they've been on a gerrymandering crusade for a couple of years now. And the Democrats could be enjoying, as I said, a real, what would be technically an advantage going into the midterms, and they would still lose the House almost certainly. Um, when you add that to the situation in which they find themselves, that's why many people are saying that this could be a generational level wipeout. I don't think we know exactly how bad it's going to be, other than to say it's going to be pretty bad.
Last one we saw, at least from the Republican side, was the 1994 contract with America, Newt Gingrich. That was President Clinton's first term. That was the midterm. Excuse me. And again, you go back though, most sitting parties lose seats. So I would agree. I think as we sort of transition over to the Senate, but I would agree. I think Republicans take back the House. It sounds like we're seeing a big margin. And even as we're doing this, I think we're recording on a Friday. I think this will come out in about a week, Spencer. We're not doing anything that's totally timely. I just see that New York, a judge struck down their gerrymandering efforts. So basically, I think they have an independent commission there. They couldn't agree, so the legislature said, "Well, you guys can't agree. We'll take it over," and it's going to be really pro-democratic.
Oh
So
yeah,
there's stuff happening that this is why we call it the way too early. But
right.
all right, let's go to the Senate. So
Mm-hmm.
and there's so the implications, by the way, too, when one party has all three branches. So you've got, well, there's more than three branches, but all three, let's say, legislative branches: the president, the Congress, which is the House, or let's say the House and the Senate. They can make laws. They can pass bills. They can. So the House of Representatives has committees. The party in power holds those committees. They can do investigations. They can subpoena people. And
Sure.
so it goes beyond just the bills. The Senate, though, is the one who approves the judges. And I think Spencer will spend, we went broad on the House. The Senate, I'll kind of set the stage here. So not every Senate seat comes up like it does in the House. And so right now, I think we have, let's see, roughly there's 50 Senate seats. What do we have? Like 20 that are coming up to? I only pay attention to the ones that sort of are contested. So let me set the stage for this. We use a site called 270 to Win, and they have both a Senate map and they have an interactive Senate map as well. And to get a majority in the Senate, you need 51 seats, or you need 50 if you happen to have the same party in power as the president, and then the vice president can break any ties, which is the case right now. So Spencer, if I look at this based upon 270 to Win, the map right now, they're saying in the bag, I shouldn't say in the bag, but there's 48 Republicans, 47 Democrats. And you might say, well, wait a second, that's 5 short of 100 Senate seats. And these are the 5 that are contested: Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. So I think, Spencer, why don't we start with one of these? And because really, if we know, let's say we assume 48, 47, which means that if the Republicans win 2 and the Democrats win 3 of those 5, it stays 50-50. It's status quo. Let's go to Georgia first. That's where the incumbent is Raphael Warnock. He is a new senator. This one is in gray on the map, and they're saying it's a seat that's unsure. What do we think about Georgia?
Well, a lot of the recent polling out of Georgia has been pretty close, though a lot of it has been favoring the Republican challenger, Herschel Walker, former Minnesota, former Dallas Cowboy running back.
And Georgia and New Jersey generally. He played in the USFL. Remember?
Yes, yeah, and yes, and Georgia, which is why obviously he's there, and he did play in the USFL. So Herschel's been around, and I think Herschel is probably headed to Washington. I think Herschel's going to win that seat. Keep in mind that it was Warnock and, forgive me, I've forgotten the other senator from Georgia's name, but two Democrats. There were two Republican senators, remember, in Georgia, and they were both upended in the general election. Warnock won that seat very narrowly, and I think that Herschel is going to win out. And without knowing any of the specifics of what's going on in the race, the reason that you can look at this tactically from a macro level and make these types of calls is because the president is, at this time, deeply unpopular, and the generic ballot is skewed heavily toward the GOP. So what that means is if you're a Democrat and you aren't ahead by, say, 10 points in your state, you ought to be campaigning like your seat depends on it, because it almost certainly does. And this was a very close race. And I think it's one that, in Georgia, historically, as a state, people keep saying Georgia is, turning purple or whatever. I don't know that I believe that. I could see Georgia having, a Democratic senator and a Republican senator, certainly. But I think that Georgia is going to send Herschel Walker to the Senate. Pretty sure about that.
Give you a little sense, and when we say Biden's unpopular, of course we're referring to the Nate Silver 538 site. I'll link to that. Give you a little bit of a context. At this exact moment, according to 538, you mentioned Biden's roughly, I'll call it 41.7%. If I'm have my mouse over it right. President Obama, during the same time, exact same, this many days into their president's equal days, he was 48.4. Bush, by the way, was here. This is interesting. So Bush was 69.3, because that was, he had the bump after 9/11. Carter is the interesting one to me. So Carter, and I say Jimmy Carter because 1970s inflation, his approval rating actually dipped below where Biden was. He was only 40%. So this kind of gives you, and Clinton, just one more I'll give you for the audience, 59.4% was Clinton's. And Clinton lost, that was 1994. He lost a lot of seats.
Yeah, and they lost a lot of seats, and so did Obama. I think a result that Obama often refers to as a thumping.
Right. All right, so Georgia, I'm going to agree with you here. I also think it matters that there's no presidential election, and sometimes the turnout is more party loyalist. That's the wrong term to use, but
Well, historically, turnout for midterms is lower than general elections, because general elections brings out folks who aren't necessarily political in their daily lives, but who might not necessarily vote. But they feel like if they're going to vote, they need to get out and vote for the president at least. I need to be a good participant and go vote for the president. And in doing so, you always get more turnout for those races at that time. In the midterms, it's more partisan. It's more partisan.
fair enough. Let's move to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is an interesting one because this one,
It is.
Patrick Toomey is the incumbent, and
Yeah.
he's been there for a long time, Republican. He's not running for
Very long
reelection.
time.
What do you think about Pennsylvania, Spencer?
Pennsylvania is going to be tough. If you look, they're coming through the primaries there. It's hard to see, who's going to be on top in that current primary battle. Of course, it's very, I guess.
Should we just say who one of the people is in there? Dr. Oz.
Yeah. There's a reality show sense to it. Is that Dr. Oz is in the race? Although, if you look at the polling out of Pennsylvania, he's polling reasonably well, and he will. I think unless something unknown happens between or unusual happens between now and then he'll be the candidate. He'll be the GOP candidate.
Just to give you a sense of the polls here, so Fetterman, the Democratic, the assumptive Democratic candidate, obviously each of these races there are primaries, and the parties vote first, obviously, and then they pick their candidate. The Republican side, it's unclear. So against Dr. Oz, Democrats are +2 right now in the polls. Against Parnell, it's even. So it seems like this one could go Democratic, and to me, it goes to the power of the incumbency too. Generally, incumbents tend to get reelected by and large if they're in power already. Do you have a prediction for this one? And by the way, we'll do this in October, and we'll see how wrong we were. But
Right. If I had to guess today of how Pennsylvania finishes, I think uh, I think it probably goes. The GOP hangs on to it, and not because of necessarily the quality of the candidate. I think that the situation is going to be so prevailingly positive for the Republicans that you could run Dr. Oz, you could run a cactus, and I think it might win. Um, but yeah, I think that the prevailing winds are going to be very strong for the GOP, and I think they hang on to Toomey's seat here. Now Oz's main challenger is a fellow named McCormick. And we may see, we could be talking about Senator McCormick and not Senator Oz. But I think the GOP hangs on here.
I'll be a little contrarian. I'm going to put this in the Democratic camp for now, but this one is really too close to call. I think it's
It is.
and really,
It is. And under normal circumstances, I would say this is a Democrat gain. But I'm going to give them the benefit of the prevailing sentiment and say that it squeaks the GOP over the line here.
I'm going to leave it Democratic on my board for now, but let's come back to it because I could switch it. You mentioned they could run a cactus. Why not go to Arizona on that comment? Because we have a lot of cactuses. And here we have incumbent Mark Kelly. Now, Mark Kelly actually just went through an election. So he took over.
Senator MIA.
Yeah, well, a lot of people feel like that. But Mark Kelly.
Yeah.
So the deal with Mark Kelly is he took over a seat. So it was McCain's seat. They put Martha McSally into the seat after she lost to Kyrsten Sinema in her race. And then McSally was up again facing Kelly. So Kelly just got elected he got elected when Biden got elected. So he's only been in, a little more than a year right now. And now he's up for reelection again because this is a seat that was McCain's seat. That was anyway. He's the third person to take this seat. So anyway, but he was elected. This is, it's in the up for grabs. I don't think I'll start here because it's where I live. A little bit of boots on the ground. So you made the comment about him being a little MIA. All of the media and all of the talk has been on Kyrsten Sinema because she, along with Manchin, as you and I both well know, has been a swing vote. And when certain bills that they wanted to pass, they didn't get Manchin or Sinema's support, they failed. So she really dominates the headlines. And for a long time, at least locally, I didn't hear a lot about Mark Kelly. I know recently he's joined Manchin and Sinema, I think on Title 42, which is, the idea of when people want to come into the country, do they have to stay, in their country and request asylum, or can they come here? I'll leave that for others to discuss. But yeah, he's shown up a little bit lately. I can tell you, if you watch any of the news shows, and I don't really too often, you see commercial after commercial after commercial for Mark Kelly. It's unclear who's going to be the GOP challenger. My sense is it's a non-presidential year. I think he keeps the seat. I don't know that the GOP has a strong enough candidate yet, but this is way too early for me to even say. But if you ask me, I had to decide right now, I'd say he keeps the seat. What do you think?
That would be my sense also, based on the fact that the Arizona GOP seems to be kind of foundering. And add that to the equation that Kelly has been a bit invisible, but believe it or not, as you know, listeners may or may not know, the invisibility, the hands-off approach, the where's Mark kind of thing going on in Washington, can be good for you, can work for you, right? He doesn't come off as a member of the extreme left portion of the Democratic Party. The guy's a former astronaut, as folks may or may not know. He's obviously a former member of the military, and maybe he doesn't hold. I don't know this to be true or not, but it could very well be that he may not hold very many extreme opinions. And people like that, once they get in, it's hard. They're hard to remove. They seem like just sensible, reasonable people, and Mark Kelly may be somebody like that. I don't know, but if I had to pick, I would say he probably keeps the seat, just on that basis.
There's not a lot of polling either. So Branovich, who is the Attorney
No,
General,
very, very little.
I mean, the polls I'm looking at Kelly is up in the polls, but these seem,
They're really old.
yeah, these are really old. Really? We haven't had one since September of last year? That seems odd. Yep, I think we both agree. Let's put this one in that camp.
Yeah, Kelly hangs on.
Yep. So then we go to where we go next. Let's go to Nevada, because I think this will be pretty quick. I don't know why this is contested. It seems like Nevada has been leaning Democratic. Yeah. Okay. I don't know why this is.
Yeah.
Catherine Mastro is a senator, by the way, the incumbent.
Right. And she's going to hold that seat. I can't imagine what would have to happen for her to be removed, but she's going to hang on there. I just not going to happen.
Okay. So then we've gone through, that's 4 of them. And you are 2 and 2. I am 1 GOP, 3 Democratic. We're split on Pennsylvania, which brings us to Wisconsin. Wisconsin is a state. Let me kind of set the stage here. Wisconsin, Ron Johnson is the incumbent. He's running again, correct?
Johnson is running, yes, absolutely.
So the power of the incumbency seems like it would come into play here. What do you think, Spencer?
Oh, absolutely. When you combine incumbency with, I think, the prevailing advantage that the Republicans are going to enjoy going into this election, even if things were to improve for the Democrats, they could start Monday improving their situation. There's just so much to do. I think it's still going to favor the GOP by the time November rolls around. I think Johnson I don't would say handily wins, but if you're Ron Johnson, I don't know that you're in any real trouble here. So I don't know why they have the state as contestable, but I don't think it is. I think Ron wins a reasonable victory. Incumbency plus sentiment equals Ron Johnson.
I agree. I think the incumbency alone, it's kind of like home field advantage in sports. So we'll put that one in the. I'm making my note here. We'll put that one into there, and I've got. So you are. Let's see. You're 3 and 2, and I am 2 and 3. So going back to our board, if 3 of those go Republican way, then you wind up with a 51-49 advantage to Republicans, which means they control the committees. They can, elect judges or not elect judges. And, they can call in front of the Senate any sort of testimony or anything like that they want, and they would get to veto any bill. So, look, I don't know. I mean, Pennsylvania, I think, is really interesting, and as we
And here's why there are other mitigating factors in Pennsylvania that people don't you don't hear much about. Um, the biggest one, in my opinion, is the Keystone Pipeline. On day one, on day one, Joe Biden, by executive fiat, uh, shut that project down, and he won the state of Pennsylvania from Trump, narrowly, but he won, and he took office, and then put the hammer to a lot of those folks that probably voted for him. I would imagine in some quantity, uh, folks that work in that region on the pipeline, and they're now out of jobs, and things are not going as well in Pennsylvania as is true in other states because of that. Because Pennsylvania is a fossil fuel state, they are not doing as well as they perhaps could be under different management. And I think that sentiment plus generic positives for the GOP, plus it was a Republican seat to begin with. I think that is what propels whomever, it's Dr. Oz, I mean, whatever propels someone, a person, to victory there.
All right. Well, I think it's this is why we say it's way too early, because as I'm looking at some of these races, I'm like, there's no polling, so we'll see. And
Right. And this is conjecture, of course, because there is not a whole lot of polling. There is a ton of polling in Georgia. People are there. The pollsters are in Georgia and are having a field day. There's a lot of Georgia polling. That should tell you that that's going to be a real contest because there's already polling there. All right. There's no polling in Wisconsin. Gee, I wonder why. And there's not any in Arizona. I wonder why. And there's not any really in Nevada. Geez, I wonder why. And so, um, you know, those states are going to stick with, more likely than not, the current affiliation. And it's the two that can switch, Georgia and Pennsylvania. I'm surprised there's not more polling in Pennsylvania, but that's because they're waiting for the candidate situation to be decided. They still have to finish their primary efforts there. And so once we have a GOP candidate, then you'll see a lot more polling there.
All right. I want to move on to this is going to be a way, way too early. We talk about the 13 keys. And by the way, with the House and the Senate, in order to stop legislation, a party only has to own one of those three branches. And so when we say, I think the Senate's tight, I think there's a chance they take the Senate as well. I think the House, you and I agree, is pretty much a foregone conclusion. If we're wrong, we're wrong. But what you get with the Senate is just the additional committee heads and some other things there. The 13 keys, though, this was designed by American University professor Alan Lichtman, and he wrote a book on it. And the 13 keys is basically, if you go through each of these things, and by the way, this might be interesting too. I don't have any data on this, but I would be curious, how the 13 keys sit in a midterm. Does that matter? Maybe I'll research that. But he came up with these 13 things, and basically the deal is if 6 or more are false for the incumbent, then the challenger wins. So the first being midterm gains in the House. So think about this: we're going to have a presidential election in 2024. The House is up for re-election in the midterm. You and I both assume that the House is going to flip. So I assume both of us are good just putting this in whoever the GOP challenger camp is, correct? Okay. No party contest to the incumbent. This would be a sitting president, and then someone in their own party says, I'm going to challenge that sitting president. Normally a sitting president incumbent, the party faithful and the machine just says, no one's challenging our. The last time this legitimately happened, probably Reagan to Ford. Reagan challenged a sitting president. You could say, who was the guy who used to be on Crossfire with George H. Bush? But I think,
Oh, Pat Buchanan.
yeah, but really it was Reagan to
Pat Buchanan.
Ford. That was the one that.
Right. Although in Ted Kennedy
And Carter.
did challenge Jimmy Carter.
Correct. I think those are our two. So here's the thing. Well, actually, let me skip that one for now. Incumbency, and basically, this key is true if the incumbent is running. I think for now we have to assume that Biden is going to run again because it sounds like he's told people he is, right?
Right. I mean, who knows? That's a big question mark, and I suspect that he will. I suspect that all the talk of doing whatever, replacing him, the backroom wheeling and dealing, will probably come to naught. Well, that's just speculation. I think he'll probably end up running.
Okay, so we'll give that the incumbency to him. So that key is true for Biden. No party contest to the incumbent. I mean, generally over the last, in recent history, a sitting president has not been challenged by their own party. Can we assume that won't happen this time? I think so.
Yeah, I think that's the safer bet here. Is despite the calls from certain quarters, I don't see it happening.
No third party candidate predicted greater 5% of the vote. I have no clue right now. I'll just give this to Biden because I don't think there's a strong libertarian candidate.
No, that won't happen.
Okay, and then we have two on the economy: strong short-term economy, strong long-term economy. I guess if we do these today, I probably would give the long-term economy is true for Biden just because we haven't been in a recession since 20. Now, we just had a negative 1.4% decline Q1 of GDP.
Yeah, suboptimal GDP print very recently. Short term, it has to go to the fill in the blank Republican.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And we have no idea what's going to be, but this is the way too early. Okay. The incumbent administration affects major policy change. So this is, if they did, it would be true for the incumbent, which would be Biden.
No, I have to say no. They attempted to do so, and they've done some things. What can be done via executive order, by executive fiat, they have done. But some things, much larger change requires actual legislation. And in that case, they have not done much. What they have done is they continued policy begun under the last administration of doling out pandemic cash.
They sent checks to people. Let's just, yeah. I mean, they sent out a lot of money.
They printed and sent out a lot of money, which helped. Certainly was not the only culprit, but it certainly helped create the inflationary environment that we're in right now.
Agree. We'll set aside that discussion, lest you and I, which would love to talk about this for 5 hours, but I agree. The fiscal response, not interest rates, is what's causing this, and it's a supply side thing. So I would say, that's not true. I'll leave it there. No scandal, and I want to be clear on this. I think Professor Lichtman's not exactly. Let me look at my notes here on the scandal. The incumbent administration is untainted by a major scandal. Major scandal would be something like, Watergate, or I think that's generally true. I don't.
I think that's true today.
Yeah, let's leave it true for Biden. So that's a positive for him.
Yeah.
And I know people listening will be like, what about this? What about this? Those are all correct as well. But what about no foreign military failure? Huh.
No, there has been obvious and extant failure.
Afghanistan withdrawal, I think is what you're referring to.
Afghanistan withdrawal was chaotic, and I was not opposed to leaving Afghanistan. I would like to have done so much earlier. But the way in which it was conducted is baffling and chaotic. And I don't think any neutral or reasonable observer who watched that can think that it was anything other than a bust.
I think, yeah, I would agree. I don't know if that's too early to matter when it comes to 24, but I think for now, I agree. There has been, and then the other one is foreign military. So I'm with you there. I'll leave it for untrue for Biden, which means it goes into the column for the incumbent. Foreign military success. I don't think so, and I think this. We're sending aid and stuff to Ukraine right now, but I don't think there's been any success.
No, that they're attempting to gain success by proxy. Ukraine. We could probably do a whole show on that, but Ukraine has, I think, conducted this so far very well. I mean, obviously to their advantage, and with the help of several Western nations, of course, through equipment and I think some logistical support that doesn't get reported. But yeah, in and of itself and representative of the interests of the United States, no.
Like by military success, the obvious ones would be, hey, winning World War II, winning the first Gulf War. President
Right.
Clinton even when during the Milosevic and the NATO operation, you could say that was
that was
100%.
successful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. So
Yeah.
I'm going to say no, no to the foreign military success. And by the way, I don't want to get too far into the weeds on this, but you and I, last time we did this, we also said, like, there should be credit for not getting us into foreign entanglements, but we'll leave that for another time.
Right.
No social unrest.
I disagree. I mean, there is social unrest. The crime stats are high and rising in many key areas, and one can't you can't not look at some of the things that the left has called for, the defunding of the police and so on, and think that has to have at least some part to play in the increase in crime.
There is no the definition here. There's no sustained social unrest during the term. This one's sort of ambiguous to me a little bit. I'll say it's untrue for Biden right now, and maybe if that's the deciding one, we can come back to it. Charismatic incumbent. I think.
No, disaster.
I think we both agree that's.
I don't look
whether you like the guy or not. I mean, yeah, we'll. That's untrue.
Listen, he's not overly charismatic, I'm afraid.
No, if this were President Obama, we would say that is true. We'd say,
I mean, whether you like the guy or not, you can't. I mean, or Clinton or any number of folks who you may or may not like, but you can't deny.
Reagan was charismatic, 100%. So, and then we don't know. Here's the one uncharismatic challenger, meaning it's true.
Oh well,
but who knows?
We don't know. If you assume what people think is the most obvious, if Donald Trump were to run again, I would say he is uncharismatic by the strict definition. But I don't know. We don't know who it is. I think maybe we have to leave this one out or leave it blank for now because there's no way to know.
Yeah, maybe I'll just put it in Biden's column and then we'll see how this goes. So I just tallied it up, and the deal is if greater than 6 keys are for the challenger. If greater than 6 keys are true, then the incumbent wins. Right now, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 6, and again, I've said the challenger is uncharismatic. If we take that out, then he only has 5 keys, and the strict definition is you need more than. So 7 keys are false for Biden right now. So that actually says if the election were today, maybe it goes to the incumbent. This is why it's way too early. But I do think it's interesting. So some of these too, like the incumbent, the challenger, all this stuff, if you were going to do this for the generic ballot and just say, hey, can we apply this to the Congress? Maybe that's something we use closer to the election, but it is interesting. So it seems like it's pretty close right now if the election were held today. Like that's the thing.
Yes, I would think so. There are just too many unknowns, obviously, to go forward in the next couple of years. But it's more difficult to unseat a sitting president, I think, than a lot of people consider.
You get to fly around on Air Force One. You got it in the backdrop at all the campaign stops. You're in the White House doing things. You have a party. Yeah, the
Incumbency,
incumbency is really powerful, raising money, the whole bit. And
right?
when you're the incumbent, I mean, think about it this way with the and I do want to get to what the midterms historically mean to the market. So the last point on this, if you're a challenger, people who are for that party have to spread their bets, spread their money around, those that are contributing to candidates. When you are the incumbent with no challenger, you're the only game in town for the cash. So, all right. So let's talk about real quick the midterm. Some of the data I looked at, and I haven't controlled for. Hey, what if inflation's high? What if interest rates are high? Like, what does that mean? But typically, Spencer, markets in a midterm election year during the first term of a president, it's choppy, and then after the election, markets rise. Is that what you've seen in you're looking at the data?
Absolutely. Historically, markets now, rise is a relative term, but markets have many times enjoyed significant rallies after the midterm elections. Many times they are also more muted, but in general, the trajectory is upward after the midterm elections. And why is that? One wonders. Well, again, it's a question of answering unknowns, right? Outcome unknown. Wall Street despises unknowns, right? And once the outcome is known, whether or not it may be a preferred direction, and I would argue, it's a different podcast, Wall Street has no preferred direction. But once the information is known, then you can plan appropriately, and markets continue.
Yeah, I think one of the other things too is sometimes there's unintended consequences sometimes for what governments do, and sometimes like we saw this with Clinton, there was nothing could get done. There was gridlock. Sometimes gridlock is really welcomed on Wall Street because it means that for a company trying to do any sort of planning, that they have a little bit of certainty that things aren't going to change. Now, I do think presidents are using their power of executive order a little bit too much, and I've been critical of both parties for that. And there's, you outlined the Keystone Pipeline. Regardless of whether both houses, both House and Senate were Republican, Biden still could have signed that executive order. But I do think that comes into play. People like certainty, markets like certainty. They don't like uncertainty. But yeah, the numbers say that, and there's a Tom Lee. He's one of the strategists. He comes on CNBC a lot of times. He was making the point in his data that typically you see sideways, choppy markets in leading up to the midterms, and then you see an acceleration after the midterms higher. Now, none of us are market prognosticators, and that's why, at least with us, we buy and hedge, and other people diversify, and you have all sorts of things. But yeah, that's historically what has happened. We'll see if that's the case this time, but seems like Wall Street gets a little more certainty, and maybe it's kind of like a restaurant. You like the restaurant, but you got tired of it. You want to try something else, and that's exciting too. So we'll see what happens, right?
Right. Absolutely.
All right, Spencer. Well, we could go on for 5 hours, but our 3 listeners would all be gone. So we'll do this again in October, just like we did last year. And we do this because we're not necessarily in the political game, but this matters for markets, it matters for companies, and it matters for other reasons. And hey, it's just sport. You and I both watch this. So Spencer, can't thank you enough for taking the time and coming on. And I know you're a follower of history as well as some of the political stuff. So Spencer, thanks again.
All right. Thank you, Derek. Always love it.
All right, everyone. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, if you have a suggestion for episodes, feel free to reach out to me. It's derek.moore@zegafinancial.com, derek.moore. Zega, Z as in zebra, E as in Eddie, G as in George, A as in Apple. Financial is up to you to spell correctly. And you can listen to our one in November or October, and you can see how wrong we are yet again. Thanks, Spencer. We'll talk to everyone soon. Take care. Bye.